Hello and welcome to episode 30 of the NF Show, NF Magazine's official video podcast. I'm your host for this week, Evan Campbell, and with me, as always, is the ever lovely Noah Ward.
Hey everybody! Welcome to the show. We're happy to see you here. If you're watching live or even if you're watching after the fact, we're very happy to see you. And if you're listening, we're happy about that too.
Yes, and we're so glad you're here this week because we have so much to talk about, a lot of good stuff, a lot of great feedback, and in fact, one of your emails basically started our main topic theme for today's show about the Wii U's name. We talked about Dan Adelman last week, the former NOA indie boss who left the company. He had a comment saying the Wii U name is abysmal, and we'll talk about that and more in a later portion of this podcast. Before that, we have some news tidbits to touch upon. Also, Noah's been playing more of Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, which I can't wait to get into. I know nothing about his recent play experiences with Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze and what he thinks about it. Will he poo-poo the game like he claimed he was going to last week and everything? We'll have to find out. But before that, let's get into some of the cool tidbits that have happened in the Nintendo universe over the past week. First, Etrian Odyssey II is getting a remake, and it's coming to 3DS.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That is true. Great color commentary here.
Confirmed. That is happening, yes.
What's really cool about this, I think, is Etrian Odyssey, I feel like it's gotten kind of a second boost here with the 3DS. There were the initial 3 games that came out on the original DS, and then we've had 4 on the 3DS, plus the original was remastered for the handheld, and we're also seeing Persona Q, which is kind of the hybrid between the Persona series and Etrian Odyssey being mashed together. So for fans of these strategic role-playing games, I feel like you're getting a lot of love.
Yeah, I think that's something that's kind of neat about what's going on with the 3DS right now. I remember it was a little bit, maybe a year ago or a little bit more than a year ago, and we were pining for Bravely Default to get released and thinking about all the great games that came out on the DS and wanting more RPGs in general on Nintendo systems, and Bravely Default was something that it's just like, oh, this is going to fill that, it's going to take care of that drought or fulfill that desire for a great JRPG on the system. And now we're getting all sorts of JRPGs, and the 3DS is getting a really healthy amount of RPGs when a while back that wasn't necessarily a sure thing.
Yeah, and especially coming off the DS, which could arguably be said is one of the best RPG systems to ever exist. I don't have much experience with Etrian Odyssey. It's basically zilch. I did play a bit of Etrian Odyssey III, just a brief bit of it. Have you played any of the games?
No, I have not.
I've always felt like I've never been someone that's really into that tactical and strategic of an RPG, but I feel like it's a game that I should give a chance because I am really fond of the art style. I love the music that I hear from any of the trailers, and now that we have the remastered original, and now with the second one, although it's not announced for the West yet, it's on the way, I feel like I should pull the trigger and try to branch out from playing the same games that I usually do. And I don't know if you ever feel that way.
I definitely have my comfort food. I mean, shoot, I didn't even try a Pokemon game or an Animal Crossing game until last year. So I definitely understand what you mean about you either rely on your very favorite franchises that you can expect to get a good sequel in, or there's something that's just so exciting and so novel that sucks your attention in. But then these long-standing series that have been around, or they're finally coming overseas, that you didn't necessarily know enough about or follow as avidly, it's really easy for those to just kind of slide by the wayside.
Yeah, and I feel the way I do about Etrian Odyssey 2, the way I feel about the Harvest Moon series. It's a series that's been going on now for years. I mean, many more years than Etrian Odyssey, but it's something that it's always piqued my interest, but I'm just always like, you know what, there's too many games in that series, or there's too many other games coming out, and I feel like I need to pull the trigger on that because there could be a whole game franchise or genre that I love that I've never experienced before. And I'm hoping to do that later this year than just sticking with the games that I see previews for and I'm like, oh, that appeals to me. I'd like to, as I get older, I feel like it's easy to just become more closed-minded. And and I don't mean that in a bad way, but it's you feel like your time's more precious to you. You have less time. You have more responsibilities than you did as a kid when it felt like you had all the free time in the world. So you have to be extra picky.
More
And that
selective, yeah.
yeah, and it makes you turn to the games and franchises you know and love. So I'd love to hear from anyone out there if they have played the Etrian Odyssey franchise or they played Etrian Odyssey 2, why no and I should possibly pick up that series or why other listeners or viewers should play this franchise. You can write into us at show@nfmagazine.com or you can leave a comment right here on our YouTube page right under this podcast episode. But we have plenty more to talk about that you can also write in about. Specifically, right after our episode when it was presented live last week, we kind of were the pre-show warm-up for it. No, it was the Hyrule Warriors Direct.
Yes, and I have been requesting and pining for a Nintendo Direct to occur, even though it's only been 2 months since E3, and I'm just being greedy and selfish. And one came, not for something that I was particularly interested in, but hey, one came, and I know there are a lot of people out there who are actually, we seem to hear a lot from our audience. I don't know if this is a hardcore vocal minority or if that's really there's a groundswell of enthusiasm for Hyrule Warriors, but I feel like we hear a lot from our listeners and our viewers that like, oh, I'm looking forward to Hyrule Warriors. Is it just a Wii U drought, or is there familiarity or fondness of the Dynasty Warriors series, or is it just in all things Zelda you're going to get
the
into?
latter. I think it's Zelda.
Yeah. Yeah, and I kind of agree, because for so long, pretty much any Zelda game that's out there, the only option is to play as Link. Unless you're playing Smash Brothers, then you can play as Zelda and Sheik just briefly, just a little bit, but it's outside of the context of Hyrule. And here's this game that's almost like a fan service explosion where you're playing these superhero-powered versions of heroes, sidekicks, and villains from Zelda. And they're modeled well, they look nice, even though it's done by a different company. They're true to the original source, where they have some cool twists on the aesthetic of design of these characters, and then you see them doing things that they've never even done before with these huge swinging moves that just level enemies for 200 or 300 feet out from them. It's all pretty cool stuff. I can definitely see a little bit of the appeal there. How about you, Evan? Did you get more? Did your excitement get ignited more from this direct for Hyrule Warriors?
I'm someone who, when Hyrule Warriors was first announced, I was more excited about it and entertained by the concept than pulling my hair out that this was some disgrace to the Legend of Zelda franchise. I thought it was cool to see Nintendo do something a little weird and off the beaten path with the series, especially getting to see, like you said, Impa or Sheik or Zelda. These characters, or what's the bug-catching girl's name from Twilight Princess? I believe she may not be a playable character, but she's in the game, and I loved her. She's very weird and creepy, I feel like. So see, like, characters get these more expanded roles and become playable in many cases. Mm-hmm. But for a reason we'll talk about later, cough, no online co-op has really kind of turned me off from the concept.
Yeah.
New Hyrule Warriors Direct did show, like you said, the villains. That was really cool. So Ganondorf, Garahim, which I was trying to look up how to pronounce that. I'm going to go with Girahim. I think I pronounced that the same way twice, from Skyward Sword. And then Zant from Twilight Princess, who I'm more of a fan of Zant, I think, of those characters. Were all announced, with Ganondorf obviously being the big reveal at the end of the Hyrule Warriors Direct.
Yeah, and I definitely, in this game, if I were to play it, I would want to play as Ganondorf, and I like the version of Ganondorf that they selected because he's pretty cool. I mean, he's evil, but if I was going to play someone evil, it'd be Ganondorf. I mean, it did it in Smash Brothers. Why not do it in this game?
Yeah, and On another note, which may put some people off, Nintendo is getting into the retailer specific DLC with this and also has
Oh.
some Club Nintendo DLC where they're really pulling on those nostalgia strings with the fact that you can get alternate costumes, basically see the characters from different iterations and get their like costumes is how they're coining it basically. So you can get different versions of Ganondorf dressed up from his previous appearances in the Legend of Zelda franchise.
And that's kind of a bummer. I don't know how true this is for people out there listening to or watching us, but the Switch is finally flipping for me this generation of consoles that I just kind of want to buy stuff digitally. And I look at these really great collector's editions. Some of them haven't been better. Well, at least on other systems. The Nintendo stuff tends to only happen over in Europe, which drives me nuts. But even the special edition things, I really have to sit there and think about it. Do I want to have another disc? And it's sad because it's really lazy in a way too. Do I want to have to like get up and get the disc out of the system and then switch to another end and put the disc away? And I used to be so hardcore about, yes, I want to physically own every single game, and I'm just not like that anymore. So these retailer-specific pre-order bonuses really bum me out because it's just, I'm kind of over it. I'm moving on from physically purchasing everything, and when things are locked down to specific retailers, then the least I would hope, and maybe this is confirmed at some point, but it's unusual that it happens. You can access these bonuses some other way, whether it's through DLC that you pay for or you can unlock them by completing some ridiculous task. I just don't want to be forced into purchasing physical stuff and more clutter in my life in the name of a retailer special offer.
Yeah, exactly. And it'd be cool, and maybe this would break the whole ideal of retailer specific bonuses, but it'd be nice if you could actually pre-order stuff digitally on the Wii U system or the 3DS by extension and pick up all of them together or whatever. And I know that probably hurt
Yeah.
relations with Nintendo and the Targets and the Walmarts and the Best Buys of the world, but that'd be something that be really cool that would appease both you and me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the other thing that they talked about in the Hyrule Warriors Direct was Adventure Mode was detailed, which is kind of this cool mashup of the old original Legend of Zelda map screen and how each tile from that map screen presents a challenge to you in-game in Hyrule Warriors. And this is a way that you can unlock new playable characters. You can find special weapons that I think can only be used in Adventure Mode. I was kind of having trouble distinguishing how they were terming that, but it looks like this cool mashup, and it immediately reminded me of Tetris DS and how Nintendo was able to like establish all of these cool classic franchises and create these specific modes that you only saw in that and Tetris and combine these two, and it's really neat to see them do that with Hyrule Warriors.
Yeah, I agree. That is one thing that's the biggest kernel of appeal for me with Hyrule Warriors is just the fan service element, and that the developer seems to be going above and beyond, and not just skinning Dynasty Warriors characters and enemies with Zelda characters, but providing a little something extra to make the experience special and unique to Nintendo fans.
Yeah, definitely. Now, the worst part of this, and Noah and I actually almost talked about this topic in particular last week, but we wanted to hold off because I wanted to make sure, in case for North America, Europe, there was something special
Surprise!
about online cooperative play in Hyrule Warriors, and there wasn't. They detailed the two-player mode, which obviously you play on the TV and one person can play on the Wii U gamepad. And I think the only thing they noted that was differently from what was previously announced was the resolution would drop somewhat. But no online co-op. Now, what's frustrating to me is that I think in every previous Dynasty Warriors for so many years, including there was one available on Wii U, and other games from Koei Tecmo, I think it's like Ken's Rage, which is an extension of the Dynasty Warriors franchise. There's been online co-op, but there's not here. And it just makes me immediately not want to buy this game or support it from Nintendo. And I know a lot of people, I totally understand you if you think that's extreme or whatever else. I get that concept. But for me, I see so many people complaining about third-party games not having co-op or pulled out of Wii U type titles, and here is the reason right here. Nintendo itself doesn't believe in online for its system, doesn't believe it's important. So why should anyone else think it's important or make an online mode? Because you're the first party, you're the development team, you are the company behind this console, and even you aren't supporting its features, and that just hurts my brain. And secondly, I'm not someone that has a friend come over that often anymore as I get older. It's very hard for me to find time with another individual that likes a game like this to get together in the same house and play it. So online is a must for me because I would have loved to play it with you, Noah, or with any
Yeah.
other of my many Wii U friends. So it's a deal breaker. I feel like for me, I can't see myself getting excited or picking this up now.
Yeah, and I feel that same way. And we have had this conversation again and again across many different titles over the years. Well, over recent years, really. And I just I understand that it's probably maybe there are costs involved in the infrastructure, the servers, the point that if it is online based, at some point the plug's gonna be pulled and you're no longer gonna have that. As we've seen with some games from the Wii, when the Wi-Fi connection service was shut down, and all of a sudden those games like Mario Kart on Wii no longer has online multiplayer. And that can be really awful. But like you, Evan, I've spent as much as I love having people over, it's really hard to schedule to match everybody's schedules up. And then when we do, it's usually a brief amount of time or it's just few and far between. And the convenience of finding somebody online and playing with them is just so much better. And there's also a benefit from a hardware perspective in that if a game, for instance, were limited, it could only support either single player or online multiplayer, I would think that the engine could be increased, that you could see a more complex graphics engine, you could see more complex worlds, you could see more characters on screen potentially. But when you have to take into account, oh, we have to display the full screen on two different screens, on the gamepad and on the television screen, or if we're doing split screen type stuff, automatically the system has to replicate the game that many more times, or you have to cut out features to make it have a decent frame rate. And if they would just say, hey, let's do online multiplayer, we can then commit to using more of the horsepower to do more with the game engine and make it more visually appealing and exciting or complex from an AI perspective or from an enemy perspective. That sounds great. And if online multiplayer wasn't such a big deal, and if everybody was still doing couch multiplayer as rampantly as we did in the 80s and the 90s, then we wouldn't see online multiplayer everywhere else. And I don't feel like it's some kind of new idea, or it's a little bit more novel, like back in the GameCube days when you had to purchase a little external modem or something else if you wanted to play Phantasy Star Online, and not as many people had internet connections, not that many people had all of the components put together. Gosh, that, you know what saying that reminds me of? It reminds me of Legend of Zelda, the Four Swords Adventure, where you had to have the Game Boy and the Game
So
Boy,
many
the GameCube,
caveats.
like all these little features, and that made local multiplayer so difficult. Much like back in the early 2000s, late 90s, not everybody had internet, and so you couldn't all play online. But now we have. The technology is here. It is proven. It's been going on for 10 years in some cases for some developers and publishers, and Nintendo is still just not prioritizing that. And it could, like for Evan and I, it could make a game much more appealing and something much more compelling, a much more compelling purchase proposition if that functionality was in there.
Yeah, and I applaud Nintendo because I do think they do a great job with couch co-op. And you'll probably see me, in the past, I have been forgiving of New Super Mario Brothers U not having online co-op. Well, no, I know that drives you insane. But it's just like, this is the straw for me that broke the camel's back. And I'm tired of this being an either or. It's either you get coach co-op or you get online co-op or you don't get either. It's why can't we have both? And I
Mm-hmm.
think what really kind of just the dagger in the back is going back to 2011 or 2012 before the Wii U is out, and Reggie being asked about online capabilities of the system. He's like, "Oh, it checks that box. It checks that box. It's going to be like every other system," and it's not. It ultimately isn't like every other system. Nintendo is falling behind and has been behind and lacking today, and doesn't have features that were probably standard on at least on the Xbox, like you said, a decade ago. And that's not something that I can be forgiving about anymore. It's hard for me, even though I'm interested in Hyrule Warriors, to support something that feels like it's missing an integral feature like that. I don't want to support Nintendo for doing it halfway there. It eats at me to think of doing that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about something that makes me much happier, though, Noah, and that's Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze. But most importantly, does it make you happier?
Well, unfortunately, we are going to continue the tone of the previous dialogue.
Oh, goodness.
I had some time to waste. Well, really, I didn't have time to waste, but I decided I was going to waste time and I was going to play a video game for Pete's sake. And so I put in Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze because I had a nice little time playing the first stage or two. And I got through the rest of the stages in World 1, and then I got into the first stage of World 2, and I was enjoying it. I felt like there was a lot going on in the stages. There was a lot to explore. I was missing puzzle pieces here and there. I was missing pieces of the amulet or whatever it was here and there, but it was just like, wow, this is kind of cool. It has potential. The Kongs even look a little cute, and I usually think they're kind of garish and freaky looking, but they're growing on me as I play through this and have an enjoyable experience in their world. And then I got to the first stage of all things in the second world, and I just got so frustrated. I was burning through chunks of lives at a time, replaying these same little sequences over and over. The first one that was really kicking my butt was a series of platforms on windmills, and the platforms rotate around with the windmill vanes. And for whatever reason, I kept missing it. And there was a couple of things that I had to collect. There was a puzzle piece. There were some bells to ring and stuff like that. And I kept doing those activities over and over and over, even though I didn't need to. But it's like, I got to get all the bananas. I know where the bananas are at. I'm going to get those. Now I'm going to get to this thing. And boom, I die. And then I die. And then I die. And it shouldn't be that hard. But for whatever reason, I was really having a tough time. And then finally I got past it. And then, so a strength of Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze that has been told to me many times is just how creative the game is in its design, and that there's constantly new ideas being put in there. And for instance, the things that you break open in World 1 that are kind of like treasure chests that give you items, it's a totally different item in World 2. And I had no idea. I didn't know if it was background art or something else, but it was almost creative for the sake of being creative. Now it's beer steins. It's not this giant gourd thing. And I had no idea. I hit one by accident. I'm like, oh, that actually explodes. It has something in it. Well, in addition to that, there's different enemies, and then there are platforms that once you stand on them, you get very little warning, and then they just collapse. And usually they are over bottomless pits. And just like, boom, you're dead. Boom, you're dead. Boom, you're dead. And then there was one that was on... It was a combination of a collapsing platform on a windmill, and all the previous windmill platforms, they didn't collapse when you stood on them, and you could kind of take your time, get your bearing, decide if you want to take the owls out that are flying around the windmills, or if you wanted to just try to proceed and not have to do this section again. And all of a sudden, it was a combination of a platform on a windmill that also collapsed, and just the detail, the visual cue of that item, what I was supposed to look for, it was so subtle, and it happened so quickly. And I like to kind of take my time while I'm exploring a brand new game. And I just got so frustrated, and I knew that I'd cleared the 3 checkpoints, and I was getting near the end of it, but I was just getting so angry and angrier and angrier the more that I wasted my time on this level. And I was telling myself, just get to the end, then turn it off. Get to the end, then turn it off, so you don't have to do this again. And I said, forget this. I'm so done with this game. Turn it off! And I'm not sure when I'm going to come back to it, but a game that makes me that mad and takes the fun out of the gaming experience and just frustrates me is not a game that I want to spend time with.
It is very challenging. And I figured if you didn't like the game, it was going to be... You're not big on the ultra tough platforming games.
No.
Yeah. And
I
I
mean, I can
figured,
get through it. There's no question that I can have the skill or the patience to ultimately get through something. But like you were saying earlier, in selecting what games you want to purchase or you want to play, I also have to be selective in what games of the games I own, what am I going to put time into? And if
mhm.
it's a game that's not really grabbing me or pushing me along or capturing my imagination or it's just really charming and it makes me mad, yeah, there's very little incentive to proceed through that.
That could have, the thing that was going to kind of be the downfall for you with Donkey Kong Country or Returns or Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze was how brutal the challenging aspects can be because you do get in those spots where it just feels like I just dumped 10 lives really quick. I mean, that happened to me too. And I feel like it's either one of those things where you're excited about that challenge or frustrated by that challenge, and that can really make or break that series for you in general. I'm curious if you thought about or looked at going to Funky Kong's shop, if there was anything that could help in these specific areas.
It, I did think about that a little bit. It would have meant in this case I would have abandoned all my progress in the middle of that stage and then start from the beginning of something that I already felt was pretty arduous to get to a point that I was repeating and repeating and repeating. And as a longtime gamer, I didn't want to. I felt like I would be compromising the experience and admitting defeat in something, especially with something that's a limited supply, these coins that you have to earn. And it's just like, no, I need to be able to get through this. And I did that with Super Mario 3D World. I plugged through all those final extra stages, and I knew the very, very final ones would drive me insane. And so I just hopped on YouTube, watched a video of it, and I made my peace and I moved on. I got through all the other stuff, and most of it wasn't too hard. And I did feel a sense of accomplishment, but I expected that kind of a challenge that late in the game. Donkey Kong Country doesn't pull any punches here.
Yeah.
They start out with the challenge right off the bat. There's not, I mean, even the first stage, there's little surprises. And from a design perspective, I like creativity. I like that there's something new now that I'm on this island. The setting's different, but I don't like gotcha traps where I'm dying because the visual cues aren't well done or it's strongly animated and you intentionally have to die and go through trial by fire over and over again in order to figure out what to do. Stuff like that just isn't cool. And that's pretty much what the minecart sequences are. And I got my first minecart level in the first world, and it was a crazy, hair-raising experience. It was really fun, but it had several of those gotcha type moments in it. You don't know what's coming, and then all of a sudden there's a pit, and you don't know when you're supposed to time your jumps. There's not the reaction window is really narrow, and I got through it much quicker than that first stage of World 2, which sounds so embarrassing to say. And that there was just one after another, and then just some of the basic mechanics were really starting to dumbfound me for whatever reason. Just like, man, life's too short. I'm going to go back and try it a little bit more and see if I can get through that stage, and maybe I'll get back in a roll and get back in the swing of things, to use a monkey metaphor. But we'll see. I'm not going to hold my breath.
I was gonna say I would recommend if you do go back, go ahead and load up on Funky Kong items that you think will be helpful. Just for the fact that the gold coins you get, those are something that continue to pile up. Even if you die on a stage, you continue what you picked up before dying. They're not like puzzle pieces or whatever. You lose what you hadn't saved at a checkpoint. So those are something that you can stockpile pretty easily. And
Cool.
I don't think you'd have to worry about like, oh, I might need these, because worst case scenario, if you did for some reason get yourself on a roll and found yourself in a later stage, you could just go, not that this is ideal, and I don't think you would come to this, but you could like grind the first level or whatever, the very first level over and over again. But it may at least get you past that one specific challenge, because I know there's like a green balloon or something that if you fall in a pit, it brings you back up to like the
Yeah.
next area, something like that that may
Mhm.
make it easier. And I'm happy to hear that you're even thinking about coming back to it. Real quick before we move on, do you think is it because it's so pretty and sounds so good, or are you impressed with at least the presentation of it all?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Just that opening screen where you see these palm trees and then the camera pulls back and it's I still, every time I boot it up, granted, boot it up all like 4 or 5 times, but it's just something that I really like. It's a nice little touch that it's something that I look at and I'm expecting it to be a static image that has no depth at all. And then the camera pulls back and it's like, wow, that's actually in 3D. Those are 3D polygonal palm trees. And the fight against the sea lion or the seal at the end of World War I, which I also experienced at a demo the other year. I guess it was last year. It's so corny and charming to see the sea lion do all these tricks that you see sea lions do at SeaWorld, and he's doing it as a way to like taunt you and then to attack you. Just so dumb, but really funny, and I like that those little bits of tongue-in-cheek humor and just the personality that pervades through the enemies. And the world design is really pretty, and the music is fantastic as well. Yeah. That they went to the trouble to redesign all of the items from one world to the next, that, oh, the items are now hidden in this shape instead of the other shape. It's cool. I appreciate the extra effort that they did. Yeah.
Personally, for me, I think it's the best looking Wii U game out there on the console. I think it's better than Super Mario 3D World, which I know a lot of people, I think, hold up as their high marker point or whatever.
I would agree with that.
For the Wii. I just think Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, they went beyond and above, and it's just brilliant to look at. But that is enough about Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, but that's not enough about the Wii U. We're going to talk about What's in a Name, which is the title of this episode of the NF Show. And if you didn't hear last week, Dan Adelman, now that he's not with Nintendo of America, he can speak his mind a little more freely, whether that's on Twitter or whether that's on Ask.fm. And he was questioned about the Wii U name and what he thought about it. And he went on to say it's abysmal, and he believed that it cut sales in half for the system so far. So we actually had a viewer write in called D. Lee who emailed us and said, "Hello, Evan and Noah. Like most working stiffs, I tend to hate Mondays. However, your show actually makes them bearable. In other words, I love the show. Thank you."
Thank you.
Please keep up the great work. Professionally research-based opinions. Now that Noah's actually playing Tropical Freeze.
Unfounded opinions is the implicit statement there.
And the overall classy atmosphere that many other game-related podcasts lack. Recently, former NOA employee Dan Adelman stated the Wii U name is abysmal. I think that cut sales in half right there. I wanted to know both of your takes on his comment. Personally, my gut tells me his assessment is a common feeling among Nintendo of America employees, but that we're hearing from Adelman because he now has the luxury of speaking freely. I don't know about 50%, but wow, it's 2014, and I'm amazed at how many people don't know the Wii U exists, or that it's just a fancy controller for the Wii. And I'm talking about people who own the Wii think this.
I think that Dan had a lot of pent-up issues that he just wanted to get out there. He's gregarious, he's extroverted, he had opinions that he just really wanted to state, and the Wii U name was a trigger issue for him, and he's like, oh yeah, I'm going to give both barrels to this. And I think he was exaggerating a bit to claim that it cut 50% off. I personally felt a little bit of vindication to hear someone even formerly employed by Nintendo to say that that name is absolutely stupid, because I said the exact same thing two years ago, I think, to you, Evan.
You've been going on about the Wii U name from the beginning.
It should have been called the Game Boy. I'm just kidding. That's a little long-standing joke for Evan and I. Yeah, it's a dumb name, and it definitely caused confusion. I don't know if it caused 50% of a sales loss, but I definitely think it contributed. It contributed in some factor. Maybe at the very beginning. Maybe for people who aren't as into video games as we are, casual people who got into Wii, for instance, those folks who don't follow video games as intensely as we do, they probably are the most likely people confused. But I think hardcore gamers out there, or people that would have supported the system of varying degrees of Nintendo fandom, I think they all know what Wii U is, and we may all agree that it's a dumb name, or we may try to take the pacifist, who cares, which I think is fallacious. But I'm glad that Dan said it. I don't think it's Wii U's main problem, though. it is a portion of the problem, and I'm sure that there are people at Nintendo, even overseas, who are thinking, man, we probably shouldn't have drank the Wii U Kool-Aid. We probably should have done something else, something different, but whatever. This is what we have.
Yeah, and off of you, we've talked about this name since its inception, like you talked about going back and forth. I'm someone that never really had a problem with the Wii U name, and I'll continue to stick to my guns here and say that the Wii U name, yes, I would say it's caused some confusion. I'm not someone who thinks the Super Wii may have necessarily fixed that because I don't think it's the name as much as the presentation of the console that hurt Nintendo in the grand scheme of things. And I think Chris Kohler at Wired, he put up a great article about this last week. If a name like the Wii can be successful and be the most successful home console for Nintendo ever, which also, first time you heard it, was a terrible name, and I mean, I I think the name Xbox is a terrible name. I think it's more about the actual product that's there in the box and how it's presented. And I think that that is much more detrimental to Nintendo than the name Wii U. I don't think sales have really been affected much of at all. Yes, there has been some confusion, but if you want a Wii U, even if you mistakenly bought a Wii or whatever else, you're going to ultimately get the Wii U. And I think one of the problems, and this is something I've argued about since the beginning, the Wii U is very compatible with the Wii system, including the Wii remote controls. So I think that that right there kind of limited Nintendo's possibilities of what they could call that console to make it make sense, because obviously Iwata and the Nintendo heads thought that these plastic instruments were still popular enough, since they brought back the balance board, since they still have the Wii remotes, since even the steering wheel is part of Mario Kart 8, and they hadn't been paying attention to what had been going on for the past few years with Guitar Hero and Rock Band and even Wii sales in general. But I do agree, Noah, that I guess we don't agree necessarily on the name, but we do agree that sales being affected are probably not being impacted that much by the name, because I think Nintendo has so many more issues. And this is somewhere that I will admit I was wrong. I said that it didn't matter that Nintendo didn't show the console, that they just showed the tablet, because no one cares about what the console looks like. But I think that was just a huge downfall that they never corrected and have had problems with since then, that this is a totally new product. The Wii U isn't the tablet, although Nintendo likes to think that it. People need to know what the box is and be impressed by that shiny object that ultimately just goes under the TV.
Well, yeah, especially for the early adopter market. Sony got burned for doing the same thing when it initially revealed the PlayStation 4 and showed everything but the console. And everybody, in this case, they clearly knew PlayStation 4. That's a new console. It's a 4. It's not a 3. What does it look like? And fortunately, to Sony's credit, once the PlayStation 4, and this is subjective, but when the PlayStation 4 was shown, a lot of people had a strong reaction to it. There were some people who really liked it. There were some people who didn't like it as much, but it made a bit of a splash once it was finally shown. And then you have the Wii U, which is just this nondescript Wii, essentially, with rounded corners. It's not even slanted. And there's all this buildup, and the early adopters who are going to drop $300, $400 when you start adding in games and extra controllers. They want to feel that they're getting something that's really appealing, and it's just kind of on the forward edge. And when you hide that, and then it's very anticlimactic what you do have to show, it creates confusion for people who aren't really following it, and the people who would drop a bunch of money on it, who want to get excited and have the latest greatest stuff, they're not going to be sold on it either.
Yeah, I think, and you'll probably agree with this, I think that there's not one thing you can point to say this cut sales in half for the Wii U. If it had a Legend of Zelda game at the launch, I mean, I think for Nintendo, they banked on a lot of the same strategies as the Wii. There really hasn't been that much new that we've seen with this console. Perhaps Nintendo Land is the big one. I
Hmm.
mean, we've seen sequels or remake of games that we've experienced on previous consoles, whether that's the new Mario, which is just a follow up to the 3DS version. I mean, yes, it's four-player Mario, but we've experienced that. I don't think that 3D really sold people, and it's the same kind of concept and art from Super Mario 3D Land. We got Wind Waker HD, we got a Pikmin game that, yes, looks pretty in HD, but doesn't really do anything new. Nintendo hasn't proved that the tablet works. I think that's been a major problem. There hasn't been anything that says, wow, this couldn't have been done before on a previous Nintendo console, except for Nintendo Land. And that
Hmm.
seemed to be quite the dud there at the onset. And then I think it's just issues compiled around that. I think Nintendo's still not getting online accounts right. Back in 2012, and we still don't have that right. Virtual console is worse now than it was for the Wii. I mean, the Wii's library compared to the Wii U, and I get that it was out longer, pales in comparison from the selection there. The third-party support's worse than ever, and Nintendo's output has been very delayed and stalled, and there are these huge droughts that have happened throughout its life cycle.
Yeah, and Wii Sports is a perfect example of it doesn't matter what the name is, what the system looks like. If there is a game out there that everybody has to try, it's such a cool concept. People are going to figure it out. They're going to figure out what is it that I have to buy, what is it called, where do I get it? And while Nintendo Land was great, it was a nice demonstration of cool things you could do with the gamepad. It unfortunately did not have the same kind of zeitgeist impact that Wii Sports had. And you can't say it's the power of the system or the name of the system or even the aesthetics of the hardware design. It really does come down to the games, and the amount of press and attention and adoration that Mario Kart 8 has received and that hopefully Smash Brothers will receive later this year also demonstrates that great games really ultimately sell a system, especially if you're not trying to do something bleeding edge tech like PS4 and Xbox One are doing, which that is a generous statement, granted, because even those are behind truly bleeding edge tech. I mean, just trying to play the hardware race and technology stuff. That's what you get with PS4 and Xbox One. You don't get that with Wii U, so you need to have really solid, novel games that go beyond the hardcore fans and pull in, not necessarily, it doesn't need to pull in the folks from the senior citizen center or your grandparents or your parents, but just something that captures the hearts and minds of gamers overall, of which there is a very broad demographic palette, and you don't necessarily have to get into the blue ocean, red ocean thing. You just need a really solid game. And I think the great games that are coming out for Wii U this year, few as they may be, spaced far apart, but I think that's going to help sell the Wii U concept more, but it's never going to make it. I think it's going to be a hard time just getting up over that hump and making it something huge and sustaining like Nintendo would have initially liked.
I think Wii U is ultimately going to be the worst selling console for Nintendo ever, and I would have never expected that going into the console or what Iwata talked about the system or just my personal feelings, how excited I was before the system came out and the launch of the system. I was fully behind, but I just feel like Nintendo is slow to get to the right answer with this console and is still slow. There's so many things that I can't believe they still haven't done, and it honestly just makes me question what's going on. I think the games they make, they are still great at making fantastic games, and that's with the Wii U or 3DS. But I think that they have not only been hit hard from Sony and Microsoft on what people expect out of a physical box or a multimedia device, because that's what these are. Nintendo can play this game that these are game consoles and we're games first or whatever else, but that does not exist in this day and world. That is like someone going out there and saying, I'm going to start a GPS company and I'm just going to do GPS things. Those are, I mean, devices now do more than just one thing especially well. They combine concepts and ideas. And when you have tablets, when you have Apple TVs and Amazon Fire TVs, and you have smartphones out there that can play games that look as good as Wii U games or look better than 3DS games, you have to do something well. And I think Nintendo needs to go back to the drawing board and figure out what works in today's time and age, because the Wii U, even though they said it was going to come back to the hardcore gamer, and I think it has somewhat, they were just trying to rinse and repeat the Wii, not realizing where the casual fans had gone, and not realizing that I think that they have somewhat trying to cater to everyone, their 8 to 80-year-old crowd. They've lost their identity somewhat, especially in the design of their consoles, and I think it's going to be a hard time finding that out. And I don't think one game is going to do it for the Wii U. I think it's just kaput, and I hope I'm wrong, but Mario Kart 8 definitely wasn't the silver bullet that everyone was championing it up to be.
Yeah, and I think the Nintendo has definitely learned these hard lessons. I'd like to think that because even with things as small as the eShop or online multiplayer, we think the truth, the writing is on the wall. Surely with the next machine, things will be right. And Nintendo, for better or worse, is quirky and does things its own way, and that's one of the reasons we really like the company a lot. And I have a feeling we're going to see more of that desire to just be different and do things their own way, however obstinately or brilliantly as it may seem. So in the meantime, we have a few really great games to look forward to on Wii U, but it can definitely be a sore spot and point of frustration if you are a fan who just wants the most from Nintendo and wants it to be as awesome as it was in years past. Right now, we're in the low point.
And just because it might be a system that doesn't sell well doesn't mean that we won't have games that we remember and treasure forever. You just have to look at the Nintendo GameCube, which a lot of people is their favorite system and gave birth to great games like Wind Waker, like Resident Evil 4 from Capcom, or Beautiful Joe, or brought us our first taste of Animal Crossing in the West. So the Wii U, I'm sure it's got many surprises ahead and will just spark our creativity. The Legend of Zelda game is one example. Yeah. Splatoon is another that we can love and get excited about. And two other points to realize is the 3DS is a successful handheld, maybe not as successful as Nintendo's past consoles, but they are doing well in other areas. While Sony does well with the PlayStation 4, the PlayStation Vita it hasn't done well with. And if there's any company out there that can completely sweep you off your feet with a console reveal or a new concept or some kind of third pillar strategy like the Nintendo DS, it is Nintendo. So there's always room to be hopeful and optimistic. But with that said, let's get in the feedback from last week's episode. Noah is going to take us through it, all the wonderful emails and comments that you left. And remember, once again, if you'd like to hear your feedback here on the NF Show, you can email us at show@nfmagazine.com or comment on YouTube.
I remember last week we were talking about, we're not going to have a lot to talk about. It's the summertime. And somehow we filled up a little bit over an hour. And you folks out there in our audience have also delivered an epic amount of feedback, which I'm really excited to go through. We have quite a bit. There may be a little bit of editing here and there just so that we can get as much in as we can. So please don't get upset. We want to just try to make sure we can cover as much as possible. First up, we have an email from Blake S., who writes, "Hello, Evan and Noah. Great work on the podcast, as always. I've been playing a bit of catch-up on the episodes lately and was inspired to send in my Elite 8 3DS titles after hearing your lists. I have a pretty extensive collection, including a large backlog I need to get to, but here are my selections in no particular order. First of all, number 1, Fire Emblem Awakening. Having enjoyed the series since the GBA titles, I was not disappointed by the 3DS installment. On a side note, there are so many great characters in the franchise with different weapons. I would have loved to have seen a more varied representation of the series in Smash Brothers. Totally agree. The arrows with a sword. It's a sword. Well, Robin has a spell book, so that's kind of cool. Number 2, Animal Crossing New Leaf. 309-hour playtime. Oh my gosh, says it all. Kind of disturbing, actually, how the game almost guilts you into playing regularly. I finally stopped, by the way. That's good. The first step to handling addiction is admitting that you're and a 309-hour playtime is. I don't know if there's a single game in my life that'll put that in. Yeah,
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 Mr. World
maybe
of
I will.
Warcraft over there. I'd be
Yeah,
curious
that's
to.
what I was thinking. I was thinking of some MMOs and League of Legends that I've played. I probably put a lot of hours in that. Number 3, Bravely Default. Almost 40 hours in and still chipping away at this fantastic RPG. Very nice. Number 4, yay, Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney Dual Destinies. So glad Nintendo at least made this available digitally so the West could get it. Another extremely well-written installment. And
That's a
Evan, you need to
cool.
get that.
That's a cool new game that I don't think we've heard on anyone's Elite 8 3DS games
No.
yet either.
Yeah, I just kind of did a blanket statement. Anything Phoenix Wright or Professor
Yeah.
Layton, just play it. But yes, thank you for calling that out specifically, Blake. Continuing, number 5, Shin Megami Tensei 4, addictive gameplay systems, including the Demon Fusion, makes this one a
Nice.
must-play. Number 6, Legend of Zelda Link Between Worlds echoes one of my favorite installments in the series with an excitingly fresh feeling, Blake wrote. Number 7, Theater Rhythm, Final Fantasy. What a fun way to celebrate a series with such memorable music since its inception. And number 8, Shovel Knight. Is it too early for this to make the list? I think not. A perfect mix of elements to tug on my nostalgia for the very best NES titles. He wraps up saying a number of other great titles like Super Mario 3D Land, Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon, and Project Cross Zone came close to making my list, but just fell short. It just reinforces that the 3DS has a fantastic and incredibly deep library. Blake.
Awesome list,
Yes.
Blake. Thanks for sharing.
I totally agree, and something that I really liked about his list is that there's a broad, well, it is kind of RPG skewing, but there's a nice mix of genres represented in the list, and so he's got a nice broad taste. And whenever you include a music game in, that just always gets props for me. Next email is from Terror. Terror wrote in, great show, guys, as always. I'm really not so surprised that Dan Adelman no longer works for Nintendo. They seem to be constantly going against anything their audience wants, and their practice is shady enough as it is. What are they thinking? They really need to stop this nonsense and be more open and honest with the people who are buying their products. Noah, your yellow Pokemon Game Boy Color was the first one I got too. Nice. It was just too expensive to get the original Game Boy for me, and I was too young to get it myself. Exactly. Terra continues, my family had all the consoles. I agree with Terra. My family had all the consoles at that point, though, so I didn't really yearn after it too much. It wasn't until I could get it by my own means that I was able to get that handheld device, and I really wanted Pokemon. For ages, my GBC was just for Pokemon. I didn't really look into other games because I had the consoles. But then I found things like Oracle of Ages and Seasons and a few others, and it wasn't really until GBA that I got into handhelds with things other than Pokemons. I wanted to chime in on the music thing since music is my life. Hands down, my favorite OST from Nintendo, and in fact overall, is Final Fantasy IV. Everything about it is perfect. Terra, Final Fantasy IV is one of my all-time favorite soundtracks. I've listened to the arranged version of that soundtrack hundreds of times probably, and I love the original version as well. I love Final Fantasy, and even though this isn't Final Fantasy, when I read this email from Terra, it made me realize I should have said Banjo-Kazooie as one of my all-time favorite soundtracks, because that is a fantastic soundtrack dynamic, lots of great instrumentation, a main theme through Gunny's Lair that changes depending on what type of environment that you go into, the different areas that are offset from the main hub. So cool. Love that game.
I have never played Banjo-Kazooie, so
Wow.
I can't speak for it or the music. Yeah, that was a game I never got into or played. I was busy with the other Rare titles.
And I went into that one a little apprehensive because it was a collectathon, and this was when every 3D platformer was collect, just like Donkey Kong 64.
Never played that.
It's a yellow cartridge. It is collectathon to a max, and the monkeys in there are just really creepy looking. Just the orangutan, nasty. So yeah, it's just like I don't have time for this. Moved on. But Banjo-Kazooie totally has the collectathon going on, getting the jingos, the puzzle pieces and all other stuff, and it is just so well done. It really was. It took the Mario 64 formula, which at the time was really fresh, and improved upon it. Rare did an excellent job, and much like Donkey Kong Country, like we were talking about earlier, the presentation was just excellent. Great world design, great graphics, great music. Enough of Banjo-Kazooie, though. Into the comments for the rest of the feedback. Vinny Black Lodge wrote in, I was kind of upset about the Platinum Rewards for Nintendo Club Nintendo. I would have liked to have something that felt special and not accessible to anyone with $15. On the other hand, their buy one get one free Best Buy sale got me 8 new games for half off and a good lineup for holiday gameplay. Wow. That's
Nice. You'll have to let us know what you got, Vinny Black Lodge, from Best Buy with your 8 games.
Yeah. Nintendo Dude GCN wrote in, interesting Game Boy stories and memories. I describe my time with the Game Boy sort of opposite to both of yours. Whereas it sounds like both of you are mainly console gamers, I started out as a handheld gamer. My first game system was the Game Boy itself, which I got as a Christmas gift when I was only 3 years old.
Wow.
I spent a lot of time. Man, 3 years old. That's starting young. That's totally what would happen with my kids.
That's what I like to hear.
Yeah. I spent a lot of time with that thing until I leveled up and got a Nintendo 64 in 1998. Some of my earliest games were Super Mario Land 1 and 2, Wario Land, Link's Awakening, Donkey Kong Land, and Kirby's Dream Land. Like Evan, I wasn't the greatest at finishing games at such a young age, but I had a lot of fun. Well, he's 3. But I had a lot of fun with those games nonetheless. I do recall finishing Kirby's Dream Land at a pretty young age, though, as I think that's the first game I ever beat, quote unquote.
Cool.
I do agree with you guys that the DS lineup overall is definitely stronger than the Game Boys, but there are a few gems on Game Boy that really shine brightly. Wario Land and Link's Awakening are by far my 2 most favorite games native to any handheld system. Oh, and I had that clunky little light magnification attachment too. Have to admit, I never really used it much. Yeah, there's a great picture of an ad showing that, and it's just, it looks like something from a science fair, potentially. Just the kids, like, yeah, wow, check this out. And there's just this gigantic peripheral that sticks out 2 inches over the Game Boy color, or the Game Boy, and there's this. The magnifying lenses were kind of fuzzy. They were kind of warped along the edges, and there's this light shining down. And it's like, yeah, buy this. And people today in this age of Apple product design and really beautiful other pieces of hardware from other companies would not have anything to do with something like that today. I could just imagine, like, what? No.
Back in my day, I needed the sun to see my screen.
Yeah.
The rough life we had it. Thanks for sharing your memories, though, Nintendo Dude GCN.
Yes, thank you. WeeMan63 wrote in, when I bought the Game Boy, all caps, the first game I got was Tetris, all caps. It's almost like WeeMan63 works in marketing, and you should see some TMs behind it. It takes me back to when the GameCube came out, and Nintendo sent out to all of the fan sites and the people in the press, the way you correctly write GameCube is all caps, like you're screaming it. They didn't write like you're screaming it, but they really tried hard to emphasize, and this was just some really bad marketing PR strategy. Like, if you just get them to write it in all caps all the time, people will be able to scan through the story and see GameCube, 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 and unless it's an acronym, nobody's going to be capitalizing that all like that. But WeeMan63 does like capitalizing Game Boy and Tetris. So that's all I got for that. Evan?
Tetris is a classic. Still fun to play on Game Boy, and I have a old Game Boy Color, and if I pick up Tetris, I'll instantly play it, or I'll inevitably end up playing it for 15, 20, 30 minutes. It's never just I'll pick up and play for a minute or two. It's just you keep going, and that music just sticks in your head the rest of the day.
I am like that on DS with Tetris DS, Big Bang Mini, Metroid Prime Pinball, and there's one other one that I can't remember, but there's just some... Space Invaders Extreme. Love those games. They're just great, addictive time sinks of games. All right. Not a Game Boy, though, so let's continue. Henry S. wrote in, hey, guys, great show. I wanted to ask you, what is your favorite Zelda game? After a quote-unquote heated discussion in a forum, a troll downright established me as not a true Zelda fan for not playing every game.
That is ridiculous.
Totally ridiculous. Those people, I bet that person who accused you of that probably hasn't played it.
Yeah.
You think he played the Philips CDI game? I don't think so. Or she. Anyways, Henry also continues, so I accepted the challenge to play every single one of them, from the NES ones all the way to A Link Between Worlds. That troll had a profound impact on your life, Henry. If that troll knew that, I'm sure he'd be like, yes. And also be thinking, like, I haven't played all the Zelda games. He wouldn't did it. All right. So Henry S. continues. The first two were a bit of a grind, so I proceeded with caution and latched onto a walkthrough. I have to admit, they weren't very appealing, being my first 2D top-down Zeldas, but I
Oh
wasn't going
no.
to quit at that point and bought A Link to the Past on Wii U Virtual Console, and I absolutely loved it. I continued to beat Link's Awakening on 3DS and Ocarina of Time 3D. With 1 month left for school to start, and still my free time, I doubt I will complete the challenge as I'm still halfway through Majora's Mask, but no regrets, as I experienced some of the older Zeldas that grew up before me. Cheers, and keep up the good work. P.S. Ocarina of Time is still the best. Henry.
Well, I am not a Zelda fan either because I have obviously not beaten all of them or played some of them. I'm trying to think. No, I've never played any of the Oracle games, and I've played half of Link's Awakening, and this may be problematic to a lot of people, but I wasn't that crazy about it. But Ocarina of Time is my favorite because I played it at a time of life where I was coming of age. I was 12 or 13. I have so many personal stories around it. I can remember getting on the bus every day and talking about new secrets I found with my friends and where they are at in the game. It was kind of like this shared experience. So I think Ocarina of Time is great, but I feel like it's everything that was going on around me in that time of life that just really speaks to me.
Yeah, I think I definitely have a number of games in my library that are that way. Shoot, Blast Core may not be as incredible as I seem to remember it being, but I just have warm fuzzies about that game, Banjo-Kazooie, a lot of the Nintendo 64 and Super Nintendo games. Although I still maintain Final Fantasy IV is probably my favorite of the series, so whatever. The seventh
Wait,
experiment.
what's your favorite Zelda game? You can't get away. Just avoid the
Uh,
subject like that.
uh,
Spirit Tracks?
it's hard to say. You know, I haven't played a Zelda game and thought, there it is. That's the one. I have found it. This is my new favorite. I like all of the ones that I've played, or at least all the ones that I've finished. And the first one that I finished was Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, and I really liked that at the time, but I'm sure if I tried to play it again today, I'd be like, nope. So the most recent game that I played was Link Between Worlds, and I loved that. And I really did love Spirit Tracks as well. I did not love Skyward Sword that much. So I guess currently the current ranks are probably Link Between Worlds. I think that was even more satisfying than Spirit Tracks was, although I really loved the storyline and the mechanics of Spirit Tracks, and I loved that overworld theme. I can't like a game just based on the overworld theme, but I really did like that a lot. All right, on to the seventh experiment. In response to your question about memories with the Game Boy, well, I was a little too young to remember very clearly, but I do have fond memories of playing it. I never owned one myself, but my older brother did, and I remember looking over his shoulder when he was playing games like Tetris, Harvest Moon, and Pokemon Red or Blue. I spent the most time playing Pokemon Red and Harvest Moon. It was because of these experiments that I became a dedicated fan to those two series, and I continue to enjoy them today. Sometime later, the Game Boy Color came out, and my brother and I had to share one, but again, most of that was just me watching him play because I think my parents thought I was too young to own one myself. They were probably worried you're going to go blind. Like,
You didn't have the same parents as Nintendo do GCN, apparently.
no. They're like, are you bored? Have a Game Boy. Then continuing, years later, in 2014, I am still able to see my mom playing her Game Boy Color. Matter of fact, it was actually just a couple months ago when I heard the familiar tune of Tetris, which is her favorite game on the Game Boy, playing in the background as I was playing my 3DS.
That's that's really cool. These memories are really cool to hear about people with Game Boy.
Yeah, I have to admit that gave me goosebumps just reading that. It's just like, oh, that's so cool. As someone who has gamer parents myself, I adore the fact that my parents play video games, and whenever I spend time with them, I'm like, what are you guys playing? And I'm always suggesting new games to my mom, trying to get her to get more Nintendo games. But it's really cool. And I think generationally, either direction, if you have people who are your parents, your aunts, your uncles, that play video games and you can talk to them about that, or if you have kids of your own or siblings and such that you can share that experience with, those people that you have really close familial bonds with, it makes video gaming all the more special.
Oh, definitely.
Kisaki Project wrote in, the EA thing is terrible. Everything is moving toward only having licensees and renting games. There's no equity in renting things or digital copies of games. I think in general, there's a move away from consumers having private property. I don't want to live in a world where I have to subscribe to tons of services and never own anything. I do agree a virtual console subscription service would be great for Nintendo, but I only buy physical for a reason. I just see far too many examples and the potential to screw over the consumer in a digital future. But I also buy vinyls, so I'm on the losing side of history. But one day, when game companies monetize all the fun out of gaming, I'll be vindicated. Kisaki Project.
I think Kisaki Project brings up a good point, though, here. One of the reasons I like EA Access is it's an option. It's not the only way to play Electronic Arts games, and that I would find problematic if they went to the only way to play our games now is the subscription service. But I feel like as an option between physical and digital, and someone like me who doesn't necessarily want to have a bunch of boxes in my house anymore, it speaks to me. But I can definitely understand where Kisaki Project is coming from.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree as well. I mean, the Wi-Fi connection shutdown is the most recent and clear example that hits close to home as to us as Nintendo fans. Frankly, I did not see that coming. I didn't expect it to happen, especially in such a big sweeping move. But that is definitely the reality going into the future as things become purely digital, or if they become solely reliant upon online multiplayer. As much as Evan and I want that in all of our games that have multiplayer, it is definitely a limited time only experience. Andy Lapp wrote in, hey guys, it would be kind of cool to see some subscription service from Nintendo. I would think more people would buy the Wii U and 3DS if something out of the box came out like that subscription service. I continued my journey of Zelda games on Ocarina of Time 3D and just started Ganon's Castle, so I'm almost finished. I also continued playing Wind Waker HD, and I'm almost finished with that as well. That is some serious Zelda multitasking. That is Zelda overload, potentially, Andy Lapp. Don't burn yourself out on Hyrule, because we have more at that Wii U game I cannot wait for. He continues, I finally bought Shovel Knight. Unfortunately, it is kind of hard when I first played it, but I will not give up and continue on the adventure of Shovel Knight. I have Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze on my wish list, so I'll probably play it soon. Well, if you find Shovel Knight to be challenging, I do not recommend to you, Andy Lapp, personally, me, Evan, totally like sell you a bridge in Manhattan. Don't listen to him about Tropical Freeze. If you have issues with difficulty in Shovel Knight, you will find Tropical Freeze incredibly frustrating. Or you will find it as a challenge to your gamer cred or something like Evan apparently had, and like, yeah, I'm gonna dominate this game. I can just see Evan, he's just like, he's got like a sweatband on. It's like 2 a.m, and he's like, take that, Donkey Kong. Yeah, you like that? That's right. I just own that level too. Yeah.
You're missing the protein shake and the flexing in between and the push-ups between stages and the rock music in the background. Yeah.
I know that everybody out there can visualize this, especially
you got me pinned down.
Yeah. Look at him. Look at him. Look at him. Yep. You can just see it. All right. So that listeners, if you're just listening to us, not watch us on YouTube, you have to watch us to see Evan's angry gamer face that he just did.
Yeah.
Okay. Wait. We have more from Andy Lapp. I just keep getting carried away with tangents. I love the soundtrack of Mario Kart 8, and like Noah said, it kind of sucks to not hear the music clearly on it. I also like the soundtrack of Ocarina of Time, Link Between Worlds, and Pikmin 3. I don't have a Game Boy, but my first handheld console and first Nintendo console was the DS Lite. After a couple months, the DSi came out. I eventually traded in my DS Lite for the DSi. Wow. I remember Evan was an advocate for the DSi a bit, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You aren't
bigger,
at all.
Better, just like when you're doing the protein shakes and flexing, bigger is always better. DSi totally scratched the itch for you, I'm sure.
You've ended up liking the DSi, so don't hate.
I did. It had grown-up colors. It came in grown-up red wine color, grown-up mahogany brown. It was so weird. It was like business casual video games, but I kind of liked it, and I was able to get for cheaper. So it was a thrifty purchase, much like my Game Boy Micro. I waited until I was never planning to get one. Then they had the cool Famicom edition for like $50, and it's like heck yeah! And then I played Legend of Zelda Minish Cap on that, and it was incredible. That was a really good Zelda game. That was a really short Zelda game, but a great one. All right. Old school 1990s is our final comment. Hey guys! One of my fondest Game Boy memories is The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. A Link to the Past was such an awesome game, and I think everyone was unsure what the Game Boy could do with the series. I agree. Because I remember as a kid, like, there's no way that black and white Game Boy version of Zelda is going to be nearly as good. Old school 1990s continues. Game Boy had a somewhat undeserved reputation of lackluster ports and iterations of better NES and Super NES titles. I think Link's Awakening silenced the naysayers. That game had a great sense of exploration, in part because it was an unfamiliar setting that was not seen before. I loved how the sword became an item like the rest of Link's arsenal, opening up gameplay possibilities. Remember the bomb arrows? I love this game so much. Old school 1990s. And that's it for the feedback.
Yeah,
Thank
maybe
you very much.
maybe I should go back to Link's Awakening so much, but the reason that old school 1990s liked it was frustrating for me because I felt like each tile you got onto the stage, it was, better hit start, I need to equip a different item. It was like walking a block, putting my backpack down, switching my shoes, that's what it felt like. It was just irritating. So, and I mean, part of that's from when the game came out, but I feel like there's like hotkeys or something like that would make for a better experience for me. So we'll see. Maybe I'll go back though and give it a second chance. But yes, thank you so much for all of the wonderful feedback. I can't wait to see what everyone writes in about for this week's episode. And Noah, thanks for going through all of that.
My pleasure.
It's always fun to go through the feedback with you. But that is it for an epic-sized portion of the NF show that we didn't expect. So many great things to talk about. Even though there haven't been too many games coming out on 3DS or Wii U, there's so many games about to come out or just so many hot topics to touch upon. I hope you enjoyed it. NF show is not sponsored by Hot Topics. And thanks for joining us.
Hot Topics.
Thanks so much for joining. Don't forget you can subscribe to us, whether that's on YouTube. Please become a subscriber as we march on to 500 subscribers. Yeah. We're on the way. Or you can
bigger's better. Raw.
On iTunes. Please review us on iTunes. I see people do it every few weeks or so. We really appreciate it. Give us your honest feedback so we can make this a better video podcast for you. And finally, if you don't get enough of us here on the NF show every Monday night or whenever you listen to the audio-only version, you can follow us on Twitter 24/7. Noah's at This Is Noah. I am at Evan Campbell. And then finally, and most importantly, you could say, is the NF Magazine official Twitter account, which is at Nintendo Force. That is it for episode 30, What's in a Name. Thanks so much for joining us.
Bye-bye, everybody.